The idea of fishing at a remote, peaceful lake seemed like the perfect way to unwind after a hectic week. When a friend casually mentioned a secluded spot not far from the city, I jumped at the chance. The lake was supposedly pristine, surrounded by dense forest and untouched by large crowds. However, there was one peculiar detail they'd added: a derelict house on the far shore. The lake house, they claimed, had been abandoned for years, its owner disappearing under strange circumstances. There were rumors of lights in its windows and odd happenings around the property, but I dismissed these as local gossip. Fishing was my only focus. The journey to the lake was uneventful, though the narrowing dirt road and overarching tree branches gave the area an isolated, slightly claustrophobic feel. I arrived in the late afternoon, the warm glow of the setting sun casting a soft light on the water. The lake stretched wide and tranquil before me, its surface like a mirror reflecting the fiery hues of the sky. The old lake house stood dark and foreboding on the opposite shore, its silhouette stark against the backdrop of the glowing horizon. Setting up by a weathered dock on the western shore, I cast my line and leaned back to enjoy the quiet. But as the minutes passed, I began to notice how unnaturally still everything felt. The usual sounds of nature, frogs croaking, birds chirping, seemed muted, as though the entire area was holding its breath. It was unsettling, but I brushed it off, telling myself I was imagining things. As twilight deepened, something caught my eye. Across the lake, faint lights flickered in the windows of the lake house. At first, I thought it was a trick of the fading sunlight, reflecting off the glass. But as I squinted, the lights grew steadier, more deliberate. They moved between windows, like someone walking through the house with a lantern or flashlight. My chest tightened as I stared, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The house was supposed to be abandoned. So who was inside? My fishing rod, forgotten, remained still as I fixated on the mysterious glow. For the first time, doubt crept into my mind. Perhaps I'd made a mistake coming here after all. The lights in the lake house refused to leave my thoughts. They flickered faintly in the upstairs windows, yet they felt deliberate, as though someone was purposefully moving through the house. I sat by the dock, trying to convince myself it was nothing, a reflection, or perhaps a trick of my eyes, but the steady glow told me otherwise. Against my better judgment, I decided to get a closer look. Reaching into my gear bag, I pulled out the binoculars I always carried for bird watching. With hesitant hands, I brought them to my eyes, adjusting the focus toward the lake house. At first, I saw nothing out of the ordinary. The rotting wood of the exterior, broken shutters swaying slightly in the breeze, and grime-covered windows that glinted faintly in the fading light. But then, in one of the upstairs windows, I saw it. A figure. They stood perfectly still, framed by the glass, staring out across the lake. Their features were obscured, the shadows of the room casting their face into darkness. It was impossible to tell if it was a man or a woman, young or old, but their posture was unmistakable. They were watching me. My grip on the binoculars tightened as my pulse raced. I couldn't look away. The figure didn't wave or move. They just stood there, silent and unyielding. After what felt like an eternity, I lowered the binoculars, hoping that breaking eye contact would calm my nerves. But when I raised them again, the figure was gone. The lights in the lake house had vanished too, leaving the structure in eerie darkness once more. I sat frozen, the binoculars trembling in my hands. My rational mind searched for explanations. Had it been a reflection, a squatter, or a prank? None of it added up. Even as the last rays of sunlight disappeared and the lake was plunged into shadow, I found myself unable to leave. There was something magnetic about the scene, an unresolved tension that kept me rooted in place. I told myself I would pack up and go soon, but a splash from the water snapped me out of my thoughts. It was soft, barely audible, like something breaking the surface. I turned sharply toward the lake, but the water was calm. As I looked back at my gear, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My tackle box was open and my fishing knife was missing. I scanned the area with my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness, but the woods and the shoreline revealed nothing. Unease turned to outright fear as I realized that whoever or whatever I'd seen earlier wasn't just confined to the lake house. The hike back to my car was slow and uneasy. The events at the lake house were impossible to shake. The lights, the figure in the window, the missing knife. My flashlight beam wavered as I walked, every noise from the surrounding woods sharpening my senses. The silence was oppressive, amplifying even the slightest crack of a twig beneath my boots. My every step was quickened by the gnawing feeling that I was no longer alone in the woods. When I finally emerged into the gravel parking lot, relief washed over me for a brief moment. My car was still there, right where I'd left it. But as I got closer, I froze. Something was wrong. The back of my car, which had been clean when I arrived, was smeared with fresh mud. Wide, hand-shaped streaks ran down the rear window as though someone had been gripping it with wet, dirty fingers. My stomach sank. Someone had been here, and they'd been near my car. I tightened my grip on my flashlight and circled to the driver's side. The door was unlocked. My heart pounded as I reached out and pushed it open, half expecting someone to jump out from the shadows inside. Instead, I was greeted by the sight of my missing fishing knife, lying on the driver's seat. Its blade glinted under the dim light, wet with what looked like water and specks of dirt. I couldn't breathe. Whoever had taken it had left it here, as if to send me a message. The sound of crunching gravel behind me shattered my thoughts. I spun around, flashlight in hand, and aimed its beam toward the noise. At first, I saw nothing but trees swaying gently in the night breeze, but then I noticed movement. A figure stepping out from the shadows just beyond the edge of the lot. They were tall and clad in dark, ragged clothing. Their face was obscured by the brim of a hat, but they stood motionless, staring at me. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs felt paralyzed. They didn't speak, didn't move closer. They only stood there, as if they were waiting for something. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I slammed the car door shut, started the engine, and backed out of the lot in a panic. As my headlights swept the edge of the woods, the figure disappeared back into the darkness, swallowed by the trees. The drive home was a blur of fear and disbelief. Even now, I can't explain what happened that night. The figure, the lake house, the knife, it all feels like a puzzle I was never meant to solve. All I know is this: I won't be returning to that lake. Some places are better left undisturbed.